Eleanor was the kind of woman who carried an air of grace wherever she went. People whispered about her wealth, her family name, and the empire she had inherited. She was the grandmother everyone in high society admired from afar. But to Eleanor, money and reputation no longer brought the excitement they once had. Life had become a series of dinners, charity events, and carefully planned gatherings where nothing unexpected ever happened. That evening, she agreed to join her son and daughter-in-law for dinner at a popular restaurant in the heart of the city. It was supposed to be just another quiet evening, one more night blending into the long line of days she had already lived. But Eleanor didn't know that this night would change everything. When they walked in, the restaurant buzzed with life. The sound of clinking glasses, soft laughter, and the faint music playing in the background filled the air. The golden lights above the tables made the atmosphere warm and welcoming. Eleanor was used to places like this. She had sat in the finest restaurants in Paris, New York, and London. But tonight, as she settled into her chair, something unusual tugged at her attention. It wasn't the menu, nor the perfectly arranged flowers on the table. It was the waitress. She looked young, maybe in her early 20s. Her uniform was simple, her hair neatly tied back, but there was something about her presence. She moved quickly between the tables, balancing trays with practiced skill. Her eyes, though, told a different story. They carried a hint of nervousness, as if she was still new at her job, or perhaps as if she was carrying the weight of something far heavier than plates and glasses. Eleanor, who had met countless people in her lifetime, felt an odd pull toward the girl. It was unusual for her to pay attention to the staff at restaurants, but something about this waitress stood out. The young woman approached their table with a polite smile. "Good evening," she said softly, placing the menus in front of them. Her voice trembled slightly, as though she was afraid of making a mistake. Eleanor noticed how careful she was, how she double-checked every glass, every plate, before setting them down. Her family began chatting about the dishes they might order, but Eleanor's gaze lingered on the waitress a moment longer. She didn't know why, but she felt as though she had seen her before, in another time, another place. As the dinner went on, Eleanor tried to focus on the conversation at the table. Her son was discussing business, her daughter-in-law was talking about upcoming travel plans, and the waiter in charge of wine stopped by to recommend bottles. But whenever the young waitress walked past, Eleanor's eyes followed. There was a strange familiarity in the curve of her face, the softness of her expression. Eleanor brushed the thought aside, telling herself it was simply her imagination. After all, she had lived long enough to know that sometimes the mind played tricks. The moment that changed everything came when the waitress leaned forward to refill Eleanor's glass of water. The dim light above caught something around the girl's neck. At first, it was just a small glimmer, a sparkle that caught Eleanor's eye. Then, as the pendant slipped into view from beneath the blouse, Eleanor's heart nearly stopped. It was a necklace, delicate, golden, with a small, unique charm dangling from it. Eleanor froze. She knew that necklace. It was not just any piece of jewelry. It was the very same design she had given her daughter on her 18th birthday, decades ago. A piece made by a special craftsman, one of a kind, impossible to find in stores. Eleanor remembered the joy on her daughter's face when she first clasped it around her neck. She remembered how her daughter used to say it was her favorite gift, the one she would never take off. But after her daughter's tragic disappearance, the necklace had vanished with her. Eleanor had assumed it was gone forever. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for her glass, trying to steady herself. She couldn't take her eyes off that pendant. Every detail was exactly the same, the curve of the charm, the way it caught the light. She was certain of it. The memory of her daughter came rushing back so strongly that Eleanor almost forgot where she was. Her son noticed her strange stillness. "Mother, are you all right?" he asked gently, but Eleanor didn't answer. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Her world seemed to shrink to just that necklace, and the girl wearing it. For a moment, the restaurant faded away. The music, the laughter, the chatter of other diners, all became a distant hum. It was just Eleanor and the waitress, frozen in a strange, invisible thread of connection neither of them yet understood. The waitress, unaware of the storm brewing inside Eleanor, finished pouring the water. She gave a quick smile, tucked the necklace back under her uniform, and moved on to the next table. But the damage was done. Eleanor's chest felt heavy, her heart beating faster than it had in years. She had lived through loss, through grief, through decades of carefully managed emotions, but nothing had prepared her for this. Could it be the same necklace? Could it really be hers? And if so, how did this young woman come to have it? Eleanor's mind raced with questions, but none had answers. She sat in silence, her hands gripping the edge of the table, her thoughts spinning faster and faster. That evening, Eleanor had walked into the restaurant expecting nothing more than a pleasant dinner. But in a single moment, with a single glimpse of a necklace, her entire world had shifted. She didn't yet know the truth, but deep in her heart, she sensed that fate had just placed something extraordinary in her path. Eleanor sat frozen in her chair, her eyes still on the young waitress who had just walked away. The glimpse of that necklace would not leave her mind. She tried to calm herself, telling herself she might be mistaken. After all, years had passed since she had last seen her daughter wearing it. Perhaps it was just a similar design, something bought from a store. But her heart refused to believe that. She knew the piece too well. Every detail was burned into her memory. The evening carried on, but Eleanor felt as if she were trapped in a dream. The voices of her family at the table sounded distant, muffled, as though she were underwater. She kept glancing around the room, waiting for the waitress to return, waiting for another chance to see that necklace clearly. She almost wished she could stand up, walk after her, and demand to know where she got it. But she was Eleanor Whitmore, a billionaire grandmother who had built her life on dignity and control. She couldn't just run after a waitress in front of everyone. Still, her hands wouldn't stop trembling. She held her glass of water tightly, trying to steady herself. Inside, her thoughts churned. That necklace wasn't just jewelry, it carried her daughter's memory. The pendant had been custom-made, with a small design hidden on the back, something only she and her daughter knew about. Eleanor had insisted on that secret engraving, the initials entwined like a little puzzle, to remind her daughter that no matter where life took her, she would always be connected to her family. How could that very same necklace be around the neck of a stranger? Minutes passed like hours. Finally, the waitress returned, this time carrying a tray of bread and butter for the table. Eleanor's eyes sharpened, her breath caught in her chest. She tried not to stare too obviously, but she could not look away. As the girl leaned forward again to set the basket down, the thin chain of the necklace slipped from under her blouse once more. For Eleanor, time seemed to stop. The light from the chandelier caught the pendant at just the right angle, making it shine. Eleanor's heart jumped. It was unmistakable. The tiny curve of the charm, the way it hung slightly tilted, even the faint scratches from years of wear, it was all there. This wasn't a copy. This was the same necklace, the one she had thought vanished forever. Her hand went to her mouth, a small gasp escaping before she could stop it. The rest of the table turned to her in surprise. Her son frowned. "Mother, are you sure you're all right? You look pale." Eleanor nodded quickly, forcing a smile, though her lips trembled. "I'm fine," she whispered, but she wasn't. Inside, she was anything but fine. The waitress noticed her reaction. For a brief moment, their eyes met. The girl tilted her head, confused by the older woman's expression, but said nothing. She tucked the necklace back under her blouse, as if she had learned to keep it hidden. Then she gave a polite nod and moved on. Eleanor's pulse quickened. Why did she hide it so quickly? Did she know its value? Did she know its story? Questions swirled faster and faster in Eleanor's mind. She tried to make sense of it. Perhaps the necklace had been stolen years ago, sold, and somehow ended up here. Or perhaps her daughter had left it behind with someone before she disappeared. But what if? What if the truth was far greater than that? What if this young woman had some connection to her daughter that Eleanor had never known? She forced herself to breathe slowly, to think clearly. One step at a time. She couldn't simply accuse the girl in front of the whole restaurant. She needed to be careful, patient. But her emotions threatened to overwhelm her. Memories of her daughter flooded back, The laughter, the hugs, the way she would twirl the necklace around her fingers when she was nervous. Eleanor had spent years trying to bury that pain, years of pretending she had accepted the loss. But seeing that necklace brought it all back with raw force. The food arrived, dishes steaming with flavors that normally would have delighted her. But Eleanor hardly noticed what was placed in front of her. She pushed the food around her plate, pretending to eat, all the while keeping one eye on the waitress. The girl moved quickly from table to table, working hard, her brow glistening with the effort of her shift. To the other diners, she was just another face in the crowd. But to Eleanor, she was suddenly the center of the entire evening. Each time the waitress returned, Eleanor searched for another glimpse of the pendant. Each time, her certainty grew stronger. There was no doubt in her mind anymore. It was the same necklace. The shock made her feel both terrified and strangely hopeful. After all these years, after all the pain of losing her daughter, fate had just dropped this mystery into her lap. Eleanor felt the weight of destiny pressing down on her shoulders. She could no longer dismiss it as coincidence. She needed to know the truth. But how? She couldn't simply blurt it out. That necklace belonged to my daughter. Without proof, without a private conversation. Still, the urge burned inside her chest. She knew she wouldn't be able to leave the restaurant tonight without answers. As the waitress walked past once more, Eleanor whispered under her breath, almost too softly for anyone to hear. That necklace, it belongs to my daughter. Her fingers tightened around her napkin, her whole body trembling with a mixture of fear, disbelief, and desperate hope. She didn't yet know how, but she was certain that necklace carried the key to a secret she had been waiting her entire life to uncover. The sound of Eleanor's words had barely left her lips when she realized she had spoken them out loud. That necklace belongs to my daughter, she had whispered. But in the sudden quiet of the restaurant, her family at the table heard her clearly. The fork in her daughter-in-law's hand paused halfway to her mouth. Her son leaned closer, his brow furrowed in concern. Even a couple sitting at the next table turned their heads slightly, sensing something unusual. Eleanor herself froze. Her cheeks grew warm, her body stiff. For years, she had carried her pain silently, never letting her grief show in public. And yet here she was, her voice trembling, her heart exposed in front of strangers. She tried to recover, to pretend it was nothing, but her family knew her too well. "What do you mean, mother?" her son asked quietly, leaning across the table. His voice was low but urgent, meant only for her. "What necklace? What are you talking about?" Eleanor's eyes darted across the restaurant, following the waitress as she moved toward another table. The girl's necklace had disappeared again under her blouse, but Eleanor could still see it clearly in her mind, shining under the chandelier light. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. She wanted to answer her son, but no words came. It was as if her voice had abandoned her, leaving her with nothing but the pounding of her heart. Her daughter-in-law reached out, placing a hand gently over Eleanor's. "You look pale," she said softly. "Do you want us to leave? Maybe you're not feeling well." Eleanor shook her head quickly. Leave? No, she couldn't leave. Not now. Not after what she had seen. Her eyes locked on the waitress again, and this time, she realized the girl had noticed. The young woman looked uncomfortable under her gaze, as if wondering why this elegant old lady kept staring at her. The waitress tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, offered a small, polite smile, and hurried back toward the kitchen. The silence at Eleanor's table grew heavier. Her son sighed and leaned back, giving her a searching look. "Mother," he said firmly, though his voice carried concern more than scolding. "What's going on? Why are you acting like this?" Eleanor's lips parted, and this time the words spilled out, shaky and uneven. "That necklace," she whispered again, her eyes still on the kitchen door where the waitress had disappeared. "It's not just any necklace. It belonged to your sister." The table went still. Her son's face paled, his wife's eyes widened. For a long moment, nobody spoke. It was as though the entire restaurant faded into the background. The laughter, the clinking glasses, the hum of voices, all drowned out by the weight of Eleanor's words. Her son shook his head slightly, his expression caught between disbelief and fear. "Mother, you can't be serious," he murmured. "You said that necklace was lost. When she never came back," his voice broke off. Even after all these years, the memory was too painful. Eleanor nodded, her eyes glistening. "Yes. Lost. Gone. That's what I believed. Until tonight." Her voice trembled as she pressed a hand against her chest, as if to steady the storm of emotions inside her. "But I saw it. I know what I saw. That necklace, it's hers. I gave it to her myself. There was only one like it. Only one." Her daughter-in-law looked at her husband, uncertain of what to say. Finally, she whispered, "If that's true, then how does a waitress have it?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswerable. Eleanor's son shook his head again, trying to make sense of it, but his mother's certainty was unshakable. At that moment, the waitress reappeared, carrying another tray. Eleanor's eyes snapped toward her, and without realizing it, her hand gripped the edge of the table so tightly that her knuckles turned white. The girl walked past them, her steps quick but graceful, and for a moment, their eyes met again. Eleanor's chest tightened. She saw kindness in those eyes, innocence, but also something deeper, a flicker of sadness that mirrored her own. The world around them seemed to hold its breath. Even Eleanor's family, though they said nothing, followed her gaze, watching the waitress with new interest. It was as though time itself slowed, the clatter of dishes and chatter of diners muted into nothing. Everyone at their table could feel it, the strange electricity in the air, the invisible thread that bound Eleanor and the waitress together in that moment. The waitress, noticing the stares, flushed pink and quickly turned her head away. She adjusted the tray in her hands and moved on, disappearing into the sea of tables. Eleanor sank back in her chair, her heart pounding. Her breathing was shallow, her mind racing. The room felt both too small and too vast all at once, as though she were trapped between her past and her present. She had spent years learning how to control herself, to hide her grief behind poise and elegance. But tonight, all of that discipline was slipping away. The sight of that necklace had undone her in a way nothing else ever had. Her son reached for her hand, his grip firm but gentle. "Mother," he said softly, "please, let's not make a scene. If you believe it's the same necklace, we'll find out. But right now, you need to calm down." Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment, trying to steady her breath. Calm down. Yes, that's what she needed to do. But how could she, when everything inside her screamed that the necklace was more than just a piece of jewelry? It was a link to her daughter, a daughter she thought she had lost forever. When she opened her eyes again, she saw the kitchen doors swing open and the waitress step out once more, carrying another order. Their eyes met for just a heartbeat, and Eleanor felt the world freeze again. In that instant, she knew one thing for certain. She would not leave this restaurant tonight without speaking to that girl. Eleanor could no longer sit still. Every time the waitress walked past, her eyes followed, and her heart felt heavier. The necklace was there, hidden under the blouse, yet its presence filled the whole room for her. She knew she had to speak. The silence, the guessing, the endless storm in her chest, it was too much. She had lived with questions her whole life, and tonight, fate had given her something she could not ignore. When the waitress came back to check on their table, Eleanor's hands shook. The young woman smiled politely, holding her notepad, ready to see if anyone wanted more food or drinks. To her, this was just another evening at work. But for Eleanor, it was the most important moment in decades. Her voice broke the silence first. "Excuse me, dear," Eleanor said softly, but her tone carried weight. The girl looked up, surprised by the unusual gentleness. "Yes, she asked. Eleanor hesitated. The words tangled in her throat. Her family at the table tensed, watching her closely. Finally, Eleanor gathered her courage and pointed at the small chain peeking from the waitress's blouse. "That necklace you're wearing. May I ask where you got it?" The waitress froze. For a second, she seemed unsure whether to answer. Her hand went instinctively to the chain, tucking it back under her uniform as if to protect it. A flicker of nervousness passed across her face. "Oh, this?" she said quietly, her voice cautious. It was my mother's. She gave it to me before she passed away." Eleanor's breath caught. The words hit her like a wave. Her daughter. The necklace. A mother who had passed away. Her mind spun in 1,000 directions at once. Could it be? Was this young woman speaking of her daughter, the one she had mourned for so long? Her body trembled with a mix of fear and hope. The waitress, whose name tag read Sophie, seemed to sense the tension. She glanced at the family at the table, clearly uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, is there a problem with it?" she asked, her brows knitting together. Eleanor leaned forward, her voice shaky but desperate. No problem. It's just, that necklace looks exactly like one I once gave my daughter. Exactly the same. There was only one like it in the world." Sophie's eyes widened, and she stepped back slightly, clutching the pendant through the fabric of her blouse. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. Her lips parted, then closed again, as if she were holding back words she wasn't ready to share. The room around them seemed to fade. Eleanor's son shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Mother," he whispered sharply, "maybe this isn't the right time," but Eleanor ignored him. She couldn't stop. Not now. Her gaze locked on Sophie. "Please," Eleanor said, her voice breaking, "please tell me your mother's name. I need to know." Sophie hesitated, her face pale. She looked down at the notepad in her hands, her fingers gripping it tightly. Finally, in a low voice, she said, "Her name was Anna. Anna Williams." Eleanor's entire body went rigid. Anna. Her daughter's name was Anna too. The sound of it sent shivers through her bones. It was as if the past had stepped into the present. Raw and alive, her son's face paled. He looked at Sophie in shock, then at his mother. This can't be," he whispered. But Eleanor's heart was already racing faster than it ever had before. Tears welled in her eyes. "Anna," she repeated softly, as if saying the name would summon her lost child back to life. She leaned forward even more, her voice barely above a whisper. "What happened to her? How did you get that necklace?" Sophie blinked rapidly, confusion and pain crossing her face. "She was my mom," she said simply. "She never told me much about her past. We lived a quiet life, just the two of us. She got sick when I was young, and after she passed away, I kept this necklace. It's all I have left of her." Eleanor pressed a trembling hand to her chest. Her daughter had survived. She had lived long enough to raise this child, this young woman standing before her. Eleanor felt both joy and sorrow, mixed together in a storm too big for words. She wanted to stand up, to embrace Sophie, to tell her everything. But she was frozen by shock, her mind torn between disbelief and the truth standing right in front of her. The room had grown eerily quiet. Nearby diners glanced at the table, sensing something unusual, though they didn't know the story. Sophie shifted nervously under the weight of Eleanor's gaze and the silence stretching around them. I should get back to work," she said softly, taking a step back. "No," Eleanor whispered quickly, her hand reaching out. "Please, wait." Her eyes pleaded, her voice full of desperation. "I need to speak to you. After your shift. Will you come to me? Just for a few minutes." Sophie hesitated, caught off guard by the raw emotion in the older woman's voice. She bit her lip, glanced around the room as if looking for an escape, then nodded slightly. "All right," she said quietly. "After my shift." Eleanor let out a shaky breath, her body relaxing just a little. She had opened the door. She would finally get answers. As Sophie walked away, clutching the necklace close to her chest, Eleanor leaned back in her chair, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. For the first time in decades, hope burned in her heart again. She didn't know the full truth yet, but one thing was certain: the necklace had led her to something she never thought she would find. A piece of her daughter's lost world. Eleanor sat stiffly in her chair, her heart still racing from the short conversation with the waitress. The name, Anna, echoed in her mind over and over again like a bell she could not silence. It was impossible. It had to be a coincidence. There were many Annas in the world. And yet, deep inside, Eleanor's heart told her this was not just chance. Something about the way the girl spoke, the way she held the necklace close to her chest, made the truth impossible to ignore. Her son leaned toward her, his face pale, his voice tight with worry. "Mother, please, don't do this to yourself," he whispered urgently. "It can't be her. You'll only hurt yourself believing something like that." But Eleanor shook her head slowly, her eyes still fixed on the direction where the young waitress had gone. "No," she said firmly, though her voice trembled. "It's not my imagination. That necklace is real. And her name was Anna." She pressed a hand to her chest as though trying to hold her pounding heart in place. "You don't understand." The way she spoke, it was like listening to a shadow of my daughter. Her daughter-in-law reached out carefully. "But, if it really was your Anna, why wouldn't she ever come back? Why would she hide from you all these years?" Eleanor closed her eyes, pain flashing across her face. That was the question that haunted her more than any other. She had asked herself countless times in the past. Why? Why did Anna vanish? Why did she never return? And now, with this small spark of hope, the questions returned with even sharper teeth. She remembered the day her daughter disappeared. Anna had been young, full of fire, and desperate for freedom. They had argued that day, Eleanor, the strict mother, demanding she follow family traditions, and Anna, the rebellious spirit, insisting on carving her own path. Their last conversation had been filled with harsh words. Hours later, Anna was gone. For years, Eleanor had believed she had lost her forever, that tragedy had swallowed her whole. And now here was Sophie, the waitress with Anna's necklace and Anna's name on her lips. Eleanor's chest ached with the possibility. Could this girl be more than just a stranger? Could she be her granddaughter? The thought came to her suddenly, and it nearly made her gasp out loud. She pressed her hand against her lips, trying to contain the wave of emotions. If Sophie's mother was Anna, then that would make Sophie her flesh and blood. Her own grandchild had been standing there, serving water, smiling nervously, completely unaware of the truth. Eleanor's hands shook harder now. A strange mix of grief and joy filled her. All those years of emptiness, of mourning, of feeling as though her family line had ended. And yet here was proof that her daughter had lived, had loved, had brought a child into the world. Eleanor's eyes blurred with tears. But doubt quickly followed hope. What if she was wrong? What if Sophie's mother, Anna, was someone else entirely? What if Eleanor's heart, so desperate for healing, was inventing connections that weren't there? She bit her lip, torn between faith and fear. The restaurant carried on around them. People laughed, glasses clinked, forks scraped plates. But for Eleanor, the world had shifted. Everything seemed to fade except the thought of Sophie, the necklace, and the possibility of blood ties stronger than time and distance. Her son noticed her trembling and leaned closer. "Mother, you're scaring me," he whispered. "Please don't jump to conclusions. You don't even know this girl. You've spoken only a few words to her." "I don't need more," Eleanor replied softly, but with quiet strength. "A mother knows. And if she is Anna's daughter, then she is mine too." Her daughter-in-law swallowed hard, glancing at Sophie across the room. The young waitress had returned to work, moving quickly between tables, her eyes downcast, clearly unsettled by the earlier confrontation. She looked fragile, yet strong in her own way, carrying herself with dignity despite the weight of exhaustion. There was something about her that made even Eleanor's daughter-in-law pause. "Look at her," Eleanor whispered, her voice filled with emotion. "Don't you see it? Her eyes, her smile. There's something of Anna in her. I feel it. I can't explain it, but I feel it." Her son sighed, rubbing his temples. "Even if it's true," he muttered, "what do we do now? We can't just tell her she belongs to us. What if she doesn't believe us? What if she doesn't want anything to do with us?" Eleanor's gaze softened as she watched Sophie carry another tray. The girl's movements were careful, almost graceful, though she carried the air of someone who had learned to survive through struggle. Eleanor's throat tightened. "Then at least I'll know," she said quietly. "At least I'll have the truth. I cannot live the rest of my life with this question burning inside me." She deserves to know where she comes from. Her heart swelled as the thought grew clearer. If Sophie truly was her granddaughter, she had grown up without knowing her family's history, without the love and protection Eleanor could have given her. Eleanor's chest ached with guilt. Her granddaughter had been working as a waitress, serving strangers, while Eleanor had been living in wealth and comfort. The realization was both painful and humbling. Money, power, reputation, none of it mattered in this moment. What mattered was the bond of family, broken but perhaps not lost. As Sophie passed their table again, Eleanor whispered under her breath, almost like a prayer, "You're Anna's child. I know you are." Her hand reached out slightly, trembling, though she did not call Sophie over. Not yet. She would wait until after the shift, as promised. She had to be patient, no matter how much her heart ached to embrace the girl immediately. The night stretched on, but for Eleanor, every minute felt like an eternity. She had found a clue to a mystery she thought was buried forever. And in her heart, a powerful realization had taken root. She was not just a grieving mother anymore. She might be a grandmother too. The restaurant began to empty slowly as the evening wore on. Couples left hand in hand, families finished their meals, and the once lively sound of laughter and chatter softened into a quieter hum. Eleanor's heart pounded harder with every minute. She barely touched her food, her eyes never straying far from the young waitress. Sophie moved between tables, her pace slowing as the night shift wound down. Eleanor's son checked his watch impatiently. "Mother, we've been sitting here for hours," he murmured. "Maybe we should just go. It's too much." But Eleanor shook her head firmly. "I promised her we'd talk after her shift. I will not leave without hearing the truth." Her voice was soft but carried a weight that silenced any protest. Finally, when the last few customers left and the chairs were being stacked in the corner, Sophie approached their table. Her steps were hesitant, her eyes nervous. She clutched her notepad like a shield, but she no longer smiled politely as she had before. Instead, she looked cautious, as though bracing herself for whatever was about to come. You asked me to come after work," she said, her voice low. "I don't have long, but I can talk for a little while." Eleanor's heart leapt. She motioned for her family to give them space. Her son looked reluctant, but at her sharp glance, he sighed and moved a few steps away with his wife. Eleanor and Sophie sat facing each other across the table, the weight of decades pressing between them. Eleanor leaned forward, her hands trembling. "Thank you for coming, dear. I know this must feel strange to you, but I have to ask, that necklace, could I see it?" Sophie hesitated, her hand instinctively reaching for the chain. She looked uncertain, but something in Eleanor's tearful eyes softened her. Slowly, carefully, she pulled the pendant out from beneath her blouse and laid it in her palm. Eleanor's breath caught the moment she saw it up close. The delicate gold, the familiar charm, and most of all, the tiny engraving at the back. Her fingers shook as she reached out, gently turning the pendant over. There it was. The intertwined initials, carved in secret all those years ago, A.W. Her throat tightened, tears filling her eyes. "It's the same," she whispered. "I had this made for my daughter, for Anna. She was wearing it the last time I saw her." Sophie's brows furrowed. "Your daughter? But this belonged to my mother. She never told me much about where she got it. Only that it was precious to her. She said it was the most important gift she had ever received." Eleanor's tears spilled freely now. She pressed a hand to her lips to stop herself from sobbing aloud. "Yes, that's because I gave it to her," she said shakily. I am your grandmother, child." Sophie's eyes widened. She stared at Eleanor in shock, her lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. Her mind raced. A grandmother? Could it be true? She remembered the necklace, how her mother had held it when she was sad, how she would say, "This reminds me of home." But Sophie had never known what that home was. "My mother's name was Anna Williams," Sophie whispered, her voice trembling. "She never mentioned you. She said she grew up alone. She didn't want to talk about her past." Eleanor reached across the table, covering Sophie's hands with her own. Her touch was warm but trembling. "Because she left me," she said softly. "We fought. I was strict, and she wanted freedom. She disappeared, and I thought I had lost her forever. I searched, I waited, but she never returned. And now, after all these years, I find you." Sophie's throat tightened. Her eyes filled with tears. She tried to blink away. She had grown up always wondering why her mother never spoke of her family, why she seemed to carry such a heavy sadness inside her. And now, sitting in front of her, was a woman who claimed to be the missing piece of that mystery. I don't know what to say," Sophie whispered. Her hands clutched the necklace tightly, as though it could anchor her in the middle of this storm. "If this is true, then why didn't I ever know? Why didn't she tell me?" Eleanor's face crumpled with regret. "Because I failed her," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I let my pride drive her away. I thought I was protecting her, but instead, I lost her. And now, through you, I have a chance to make it right." For a long moment, silence hung heavy between them. Sophie stared at Eleanor, her mind spinning, her heart caught between disbelief and hope. She had always felt a hole in her life, an emptiness she could never explain. Now, sitting across from this tearful woman, that emptiness seemed to have found a reason. Eleanor squeezed Sophie's hands gently. "I don't ask you to accept me right away," she said softly. "But I beg you, let me tell you about your mother. Let me tell you who she really was. You deserve to know your story." Sophie's chest rose and fell rapidly as she struggled to process it all. Her world had just shifted in the span of minutes. She had walked into the restaurant that night expecting just another long shift, another evening of serving strangers. And now, she had walked straight into a hidden past, a family she never knew existed. At last, she nodded slowly, her voice barely a whisper. "All right, tell me." Eleanor's tears fell freely, but she smiled through them, a smile filled with both sorrow and hope. For the first time in decades, she felt a door open, a light breaking through the darkness of her grief. The truth, long buried, had finally been revealed. Eleanor's hands trembled as she held Sophie's. The warmth of the girl's skin felt real, solid, and yet the moment still felt like a dream she might wake up from. For so many years, she had prayed for a miracle, for some sign of her daughter. And here, sitting across from her, was living proof that her bloodline had not ended, that her daughter had left behind a piece of herself in this young woman. Sophie's eyes were wide, filled with uncertainty, but also glistening with tears. She had listened carefully as Eleanor spoke about Anna, the childhood memories, the laughter, the stubborn streak, the necklace given as a gift of love. Every word had struck something deep inside Sophie's heart. She could almost see her mother in the descriptions, almost hear her voice again. Yet confusion clouded her mind. "All these years," Sophie whispered, her voice shaky. "I thought we had no family. My mom never told me any of this. Why would she hide you from me? Why would she let me grow up thinking we were alone?" Eleanor's eyes filled again, the guilt weighing heavy in her chest. "Because she was hurt, my dear. I was too hard on her. I thought I was guiding her, but instead, I pushed her away. She must have felt she couldn't come back. That is my sin. That is what I have carried every day since she left." Sophie looked down at the necklace in her hands. She had worn it her whole life, never knowing the story behind it. And now, here was this woman telling her it was a symbol of love, not just between mother and daughter, but also grandmother and granddaughter. Her throat tightened, and she blinked rapidly, trying to stop the flood of tears. Eleanor couldn't help herself. Slowly, hesitantly, she reached across the table and placed her wrinkled hand gently against Sophie's cheek. "You look so much like her," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Your eyes, your smile. I see Anna in you." That simple touch broke through the walls Sophie had built inside herself. A sob escaped her lips before she could hold it back. She leaned into Eleanor's hand, the warmth filling a space in her heart she hadn't realized was empty. She had grown up longing for connection, for roots, for a sense of belonging. And now, in this unexpected moment, she had found it. Eleanor moved from her chair, her knees trembling as she stood. Sophie rose as well, unsure what to do. But before either of them could think, Eleanor pulled her into her arms. The hug was tight, desperate, filled with all the years of loss, regret, and longing. Sophie's body stiffened for a second, then melted into the embrace. Tears streamed down both their faces as they clung to each other like two souls who had been separated for a lifetime. The restaurant was nearly empty, but the few staff members who remained stood quietly in the background, moved by the sight. Even Eleanor's son and daughter-in-law, watching from a short distance, felt the weight of the moment. They had never seen Eleanor so vulnerable, so raw, and yet so alive. "You are my granddaughter," Eleanor whispered into Sophie's hair. Her voice shook with emotion. "I lost your mother, but I will not lose you. Not again. Not ever." Sophie's tears soaked into Eleanor's shoulder. "I've never had this," she admitted in a broken voice. "I always felt like something was missing, and now I know why." They pulled back slightly, their faces wet, their eyes searching each other's as if memorizing every detail. Eleanor gently cupped Sophie's face in both hands. "I can never replace your mother," she said softly, "but I can love you, protect you, and give you everything she would have wanted for you. If you will let me." Sophie nodded slowly, overwhelmed, but a small smile broke through her tears. "I think she would have wanted this too," she whispered. For Eleanor, it was like sunlight breaking through clouds after years of darkness. Her heart, once heavy with grief, felt light for the first time in decades. She had spent so long believing her family was gone, her legacy lost. And now, here stood Sophie, a new beginning, a second chance. Eleanor's son finally stepped forward, his face softened by what he had witnessed. He looked at Sophie, his voice unsure. "If what my mother says is true, then you're my niece." Sophie turned to him, wiping her eyes. She gave a small, nervous laugh, though her voice still shook. "I never thought I'd hear words like that in my life." He smiled faintly, awkwardly, but with sincerity. "Then maybe it's time you did." His wife joined him, her expression warm, and she gently touched Sophie's shoulder. "Welcome to the family," she whispered. Sophie's heart swelled at those words. She had spent years feeling small, ordinary, invisible in a big world. And now, suddenly, she wasn't invisible anymore. She belonged somewhere. She belonged to someone. Eleanor pulled Sophie close again, holding her tightly, as though she feared letting go would make the girl vanish like a dream. But Sophie didn't pull away. She hugged her back, her arms wrapping around the woman who had just stepped into her life yet already filled it with something powerful, love. In that embrace, the years of loneliness and grief began to heal. The past could not be changed, the mistakes could not be undone, but the future was still open. And in that moment, both Eleanor and Sophie silently promised to walk into it together, no longer strangers, but family. The restaurant was quiet now, the lights dimmed, the chairs stacked in the corner. Only Eleanor, Sophie, and a few staff members remained. The world outside went on as usual, but inside that small dining room, everything had changed forever. Eleanor held Sophie's hand tightly, afraid to let go. After years of believing her family was lost, she had discovered a piece of her daughter living on. It felt like a miracle, something she never imagined she would be blessed with so late in life. Sophie, still wiping away her tears, looked at Eleanor with a mixture of disbelief and hope. "This feels unreal," she admitted softly. "All my life I thought I had no family. And now, suddenly, I find out I do. I don't even know how to process it." Eleanor smiled through her tears, her voice gentle. "Take your time, my dear. We don't have to rush. What matters is that you're not alone anymore. And neither am I." For a long moment, they sat together in silence, their hands linked across the table. The bond between them felt fragile, like something new and delicate, but it was real. Both of them knew it would take time to build trust, to heal wounds, but the foundation had been laid. Eleanor's son stepped closer, his face softened by the scene. He looked at Sophie with cautious kindness. "I know this must be overwhelming for you," he said. But if you are truly my sister's daughter, then you're part of this family now. That means you're part of my life too. Sophie glanced at him, unsure, but nodded slowly. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, even if he still struggled to believe fully. For years, she had longed for words like those, for someone to say she belonged. Eleanor squeezed her hand again. I don't want to pressure you, Sophie, she said softly. You've built your life, and I respect that. But I want you to know, my home, my heart, my family, it's all open to you. Whatever you choose, you will always have a place with me. Sophie's lips trembled as she smiled faintly. You don't even know me yet, she whispered. Eleanor shook her head. I know enough. I see your kindness, your strength. I see my Anna in you. That's all I need. Those words sank deep into Sophie's heart. She had grown up struggling, working hard to make ends meet, carrying memories of a mother who loved her but left behind too many unanswered questions. Now, suddenly, she had a grandmother who looked at her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. For the first time in her life, she felt truly seen. Eleanor stood slowly, her body tired but her spirit renewed. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small card. Here, she said, pressing it into Sophie's hand. This is my number. Call me anytime, day or night. Even if you just want to talk, even if you need nothing more than someone to listen, I'll be there. Sophie looked down at the card, the elegant handwriting on it, and her chest tightened. She nodded. I will, she whispered. The night air outside was cool when they finally stepped out of the restaurant together. The city lights sparkled in the distance, cars passed by, and the world seemed unchanged. Yet for Eleanor and Sophie, everything was different. They stood on the sidewalk for a moment, reluctant to part. Eleanor brushed a strand of hair from Sophie's face and smiled. You remind me of her so much, she said softly. But you're also yourself, unique and strong. I'm proud of you already, even though we've only just met. Sophie's eyes filled again, though this time the tears were not only of sadness but also of joy. Thank you, she whispered. I've never heard anyone say that to me before. Eleanor's heart ached at the thought of all the years Sophie had lived without hearing such words, without knowing the love of a grandmother, an uncle, an entire family waiting to welcome her. She silently promised herself she would spend the rest of her days making up for that lost time. Her son approached and placed a careful hand on Sophie's shoulder. Come visit us soon, he said gently. We'd like to get to know you better. No pressure, just family. Sophie nodded again, her heart full but overwhelmed. She glanced at Eleanor one more time, holding her gaze. There was a new light in Eleanor's eyes, one Sophie recognized, hope. They embraced one last time before parting ways for the night. Sophie walked down the street toward her small apartment, clutching the card tightly in her hand, while Eleanor and her family's car waited at the curb. Eleanor leaned against the seat, exhausted yet alive in a way she hadn't felt for decades. As the car pulled away, Eleanor whispered softly to herself, Thank you, Anna, for leaving me this gift. She pressed her hand over her heart, feeling warmth where once there had been only emptiness. Sophie, walking alone, touched her necklace and smiled faintly through her tears. For years it had been just a reminder of her mother, a symbol of loss. But now it carried new meaning. It was not just a necklace. It was a bridge, a link to the past and a doorway to a future she had never dreamed of. That night, both Eleanor and Sophie lay awake in their separate homes, unable to sleep, replaying every word, every glance, every tear. They knew the road ahead would not be easy. There would be questions, doubts, and wounds to heal. But they also knew one thing with certainty. They had found each other. And in finding each other, they had found something even greater, hope, love, and a chance at a new beginning.